We're here in DC in the University Club, not far away from the White House, where, of course, you held several positions during the Carter presidency. Now we're here for a much different reason, the passing of Mr. Carter. Can you take us back to your time in DC and the White House? What were some of the biggest accomplishments that you all did together, you and Mr. Carter side by side?
One of the interesting things about Jimmy Carter as president was that he had aspirations across such a wide range of activity. He created, for example, domestically, he created the inspectors general for the departments to search out fraud and abuse and waste. He established the Superfund to clean up toxic sites that had appeared all over the country as a result of various problems. On the international front, he negotiated the Panama Canal treaties when it was not a popular thing to do, but a very, very worthy thing to do. He established diplomatic relations with China. He negotiated the SALT II treaty, the nuclear treaty with the Soviet Union. He's one of the greatest environmental presidents by acclamation of the historians. He doubled the size of the national park system in the country in just his 1 4-year term of office. He tripled the size of the wilderness areas of the United States. He was a president who woke up every morning thinking what he could do as president that would serve the interests of the country. He did that almost without regard, in some cases with too little regard, for the political costs that he would have to pay in order to achieve the goals that he had to achieve. The president's question always to us was, let's figure out what the right thing to do is, and we'll work the politics out. Rosalynn was more political than President Carter. She had a very keen political sense, and she'd fuss at Jimmy sometimes because he was not as sensitive to the political implications and the political costs as she thought he should be. There's a common misconception about Carter and his effectiveness with the Congress. President Carter, in his 4-year term, passed over 40% of the major legislation that he proposed to the Congress. That's a record that was not matched by anyone except in modern history, except LBJ. So he was taking a lot to the Congress. He was asking them to do a lot. He was asking them to deregulate the prices of oil and natural gas so that he could lower the prices to the consumer and increase research on alternative sources of energy. He was a very ambitious president who set about his task almost without regard to the political costs that it would take to achieve his goals.
And you know, as we speak to people in Georgia, as I am on the ground speaking to supporters who are coming out from around the world here in DC this week, that is some of the feedback that I got was Mr. Carter did not really care too much about the politics or pleasing the military or politicians. He did what he thought was right for the people. As you know, that got him in some hot water. I mean, one of the biggest controversial decisions, the most difficult times while you were chief of staff was that hostage situation in Iran. Take us back there and the challenges that you all faced from the public, that pressure. How did you get through that, especially when you held such a high position at that time?
The hostages were taken in November of 1979. And the president was determined from the beginning of that crisis to do everything conceivably possible within his power as president to bring those Americans home safely, which he did ultimately. It took a year. In fact, it took more than a year. The hostages, as you may remember, you're too young to remember, were not released until Reagan was inaugurated on January 20th of 1981. But the president imposed sanctions, severe worldwide sanctions, economic, financial sanctions on Iran that took tremendous bite out of their economy and caused all kinds of dislocation and problems. Unfortunately, the rescue mission that we launched failed. That was a tragedy. It's one of the things that he regrets most, I think, regretted most about the presidency, that didn't work. He sometimes said, when asked what would he have done differently, he said he would have had one more helicopter. That's another example where the president's sort of dedication to task was unrelenting. He was determined to bring them back safely. Ultimately, they all, without exception, without a single exception, were brought back safely, and he was grateful for that.
I want to take things from the White House to back in Georgia, where you and Mr. Carter met, right? Can you talk to me about Jimmy Carter from Plains, the peanut farmer, the everyday Georgian that so many people got to know and love, and I'm sure your families were very close. Can you tell me about some of those fondest memories outside of the White House?
I graduated from law school in 1966. Went to Atlanta to join a firm called King and Spalding in Atlanta. One of the senior partners of the firm was Charlie Curbo, who was the president's personal lawyer, well, the then state senator personal lawyer, and closest friend, closest advisor. And it was through Mr. Curbo that I met Jimmy. Curbo suggested rather insistently that I drive down to Plains. Jimmy had just run for governor that year, 1966, had barely missed getting into a runoff with former Governor Ellis Arnold. It's common, I think, conventional wisdom that had he gotten into the runoff, he would have won the governorship in '66 and probably wouldn't have been president. Interesting turn of events. But I did go down. I drove my motorcycle down one Saturday morning, and we spent the day together. I was meeting him for the first time. I remember when I pulled up on the motorcycle outside the peanut warehouse. Here he comes out. I'd never met him before, seen him on television, of course. And he's wearing a plaid shirt and blue jeans and a leather belt and boots, and big smile on his face, welcoming me. We went to breakfast. We drove around all day. We went over to Archery, Georgia, which is actually where he was raised until he was about 12. It's where the family farm was originally. We went through that farm. We went over to the pond house. We went to the peanut fields. We went to the warehouse. We had lunch together. We spent all day driving around in his Chevrolet Impala talking. And I was fascinated with him. He was warm and unpretentious and friendly, straight-spoken. He was obviously a voracious reader. During the course of our conversation, when we were talking about politics and the role of politics in the world, he quoted an American theologian whose name was Reinhold Niebuhr, a philosopher and theologian, to the general effect that the sad duty of politics is to bring justice to a sinful world. And I think that motivation was the motivation that was a common denominator throughout Jimmy Carter's public life, as a state senator, as governor, as president of the United States, as the most extraordinary former president, I think, that we've ever had. What he's done across the world in terms of dealing with dread diseases, particularly in the continent of Africa, river blindness, and it's amazing. He's virtually eliminated these these diseases because he was able, as a former president, to convene almost anyone he wanted to convene to address the problem. The convening power of a former president who's motivated to convene is enormous. Most presidents, I say this respectfully, most presidents don't take full advantage of that power to convene, to focus other people's attention on major problems. Carter did. He did it for 40 years. And whether he was overseeing elections, whether he was advising governments, whether he was mediating disputes, whether he was dealing with diseases, he and Rosalynn, who was his constant partner, never let up. They simply never let up. A word about Rosalynn. Rosalynn Smith Carter, whom I knew well and loved, was every bit Jimmy Carter's equal. They were different. They had different personalities in many ways. She was outspoken. She could be blunt and frank. I loved Rosalynn. I loved the way she expressed herself, didn't hold back. I loved watching the interplay between the two of them when they disagreed about something. But the truth at the bottom of it all was that they had one of the greatest partnerships, one of the greatest, deepest friendships, one of the best marriages that I have ever seen in my life. It might sound a little corny to say it, but the truth is that they were in love with each other from the time she was 19 and he was 22 until she died. 77 years of marriage, and the partnership that they had was reflected in everything that Jimmy did.
And you could see it. It was evident.
I saw it all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to ask you, post-White House, obviously you and your wife in Atlanta right now, not far away from the Carter Center, the center of where so many things have been, so many things that you just talked about internationally and here in Georgia. What would you say was the driving purpose between Mr. and Mrs. Carter? Why did they continue to do all the things that they've done after the presidency? They could have just sat back, relaxed, and enjoyed retirement, but they didn't. They kept pushing. Habitat for Humanity, eliminating guinea worm, overseeing those elections, making sure that people in countries that they didn't live in those countries, they didn't have to care about it, but they did. What do you think kept them going?
Everyone knows this because they've read about Carter and they've heard about him. They've heard him talked about. They've watched him. Jimmy Carter was a Christian man. He was not the kind of Christian who talked about his personal religion. I knew and was close with Jimmy Carter for over 50 years. And he never talked about his personal faith with me. He never brought it up. He was not evangelical in that sense, but he was deeply, deeply Christian. His Christian faith was what motivated him. It's what set goals and aspirations for him. For him, public service, using what he had, using the power that accrued to him as a governor, as a president, as a former president, was a duty that he regarded he had to do the very best he could for the most people that he could reach. That was his motivation, and he never gave it up. One of the things I saw about Carter almost from the moment I met him was that he was a profoundly self-confident man. He had a very deep, unshakable belief in himself. He also had a remarkable self-discipline, an ability to focus. everything he had to bring to bear, his intelligence, his judgment, his integrity. He had this ability to bring all of that to bear on whatever the issue or problem or challenge was before him. And it was one of the reasons he was so successful. Another ability that he had, which I saw both as governor but particularly as president, time and time again, day in and day out, was his ability to assimilate, absorb an enormous amount of information and reduce it to its principal elements, to simplify it to its principal points. He always amazed me. We'd take in briefing materials, we'd have discussions with him, he'd be absorbing all this information, and at the end of it all, everyone else would leave, I would be with him, and he'd jot down on a little 3x5 card 4 or 5 points, and those 4 or 5 points were the essence of everything that had just been discussed for about 4 hours. And those abilities of intelligence and focus served him extremely well as President of the United States. Day in and day out, treated people respectfully. He listened. He wanted to hear all the voices that agreed with him and didn't agree with him. And one of the duties of any chief of staff, one of my duties as his chief of staff, was to do everything in my power to see to it that he was hearing the voices, the points of view that he needed to hear and consider in order to make an informed decision. Any decision that reaches the President of the United States is a close call. If it were not a close call, it would be solved by somebody else. So that by definition, any question, any problem that ultimately reaches the Oval Office, the President of the United States, is going to be a 51-49 call. And you've got to do the best you can. You're not going to please all the people all the time. As a matter of fact, you're going to have 49% of the people against you half the time. But that's part of it, and he knew that. And that was where his quiet, solid self-confidence, his faith in his own judgment and ability served him well.
If you could say one thing to him right now, to Mr. Carter right now, what would you tell him?
Thank you. That's what I'd say. I would say thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Watson, for taking the time to speak with us, your years of service, and just your memories with Mr. Carter, having the opportunity to talk to you today and just reminisce on all of the good times and, of course, some of the bad. We do appreciate it. Thank you.